In a dimly lit cabin high above the Atlantic, a quietly tenacious strategist was about to lose everything she'd spent years building. What started as a routine red-eye to Dubai to finalize a historic merger took a shocking turn when she opened a message titled Immediate Termination. Arielle Vance wasn't your typical cloud architecture consultant. For 18 months, she'd orchestrated the $1.8 billion ArcBridge initiative across 3 continents, known for her fluency in global compliance and her unshakable precision under pressure. When she saw a falcon strike her professional identity midair, via a cold corporate email, she had no idea she was walking into revolution. Arielle didn't panic, she powered up a second laptop that would lead to a reckoning no boardroom was prepared for. What began as an international project under a corporate giant became a founder's crusade for professional sovereignty. The global tech elite would never forget the week Arielle Vance showed them what happens when you fire the architect of your empire mid-flight. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The message arrived at exactly 2:47 a.m. somewhere over the Atlantic. Just as the cabin lights dimmed and the city lights of London vanished beneath the cloud subject line immediate termination notice effective immediately. For a few seconds I couldn't process what I was reading. I kept blinking thinking maybe the screen hadn't fully loaded, but it was all there in perfect clarity: my name, my role, and the sentence that made my heart drop through the floor. Your employment with Hyperion 9 has been terminated effective immediately. Your access has been revoked. Please do not return to any company property. No call, no meeting, no thank you. Just this sterile final notice. And the sender, Darren Roque, the interim CEO himself, the very man who shook my hand 3 weeks ago and said, Arielle, you're the only one I trust to pull this off. I looked around the cabin. Everyone else was asleep, curled into their business class pods with eye masks and wine-stained pillows. I was alone with the hum of the jet engines and a silence that suddenly felt louder than anything I'd ever heard. 18 months, 3 continents: Tokyo for initial alignment, London for compliance, Dubai for the close. I hadn't just participated in Project ArcBridge, I'd built it. 3 global giants, 1 synchronized move to Hyperion's cloud architecture, $1.8 billion across 7 years, and now I didn't even work there anymore. I felt something cold settle in my chest, not rage, not yet, just disbelief, like someone had pulled the ground out from under me while I was still mid-step. I stared at the laptop in front of me for another full minute, watching as my Hyperion email access began to fail. My calendar disappeared, my contacts vanished, the digital erasure was happening in real time. Then, without saying a word, I reached under the seat and pulled out a second laptop, matte black, unbranded and encrypted, the one no one at Hyperion knew existed. I opened it, logged, and watched the screen blink awake, and I smiled. They thought this was the end of my journey. They had no idea I'd already started another one. The screen displayed a simple interface, Naira Core, in clean white letters against a dark background. Below it, a message from Zain Kazari, my former colleague, my secret co-founder, the brilliant CTO who'd been fired from Hyperion 3 years ago for asking too many uncomfortable questions about their AI compliance failures. Systems are live, his message read. Legal docs cleared, infrastructure ready. When you're ready to flip the switch, just say the word. I typed back quickly. The switch is flipped. They made their choice, now we make ours. As the plane began its descent toward Dubai, I opened the secure partition on my laptop, the one containing every detail of Project ArcBridge, every client relationship, every technical specification, every legal framework I'd spent 18 months building. Because here's what Darren and his board of short-sighted executives didn't understand: when you architect a deal this complex, when you build relationships across 3 continents, when you speak 4 languages and understand 6 different regulatory frameworks, you don't just manage the project, you become the project. And they just fired the project. I pulled up the client contact list: Telorigin in Tokyo, Nextshore in Lagos, Eurosyn in Amsterdam. 3 companies that trusted Arielle Vance, not Hyperion 9. 3 companies that had signed preliminary agreements based on my technical specifications, my compliance framework, my personal assurances that their data would remain sovereign, their systems would remain secure. I began typing the first of 3 carefully crafted messages. Dear Ray, this is Arielle Vance writing from my personal secure channel. I wanted to inform you that there have been some developments in the ArcBridge project structure. I'll be in Dubai tomorrow as scheduled and would like to discuss some enhanced options that weren't available through our previous corporate framework. I believe you'll find them very interesting. Regards, Arielle. Similar messages went to Elias at Nextshore and Linda at Eurosyn, each one carefully worded, each one technically accurate, each one completely divorced from Hyperion's corporate identity. By the time we touched down in Dubai, I had responses from all 3. Looking forward to hearing more. From Ray, intrigued by the possibilities. From Elias, always open to better solutions. From Linda, I walked through the airport with my single carry-on bag feeling lighter than I had in months. They thought they'd trapped me in their corporate structure, used my expertise to build their empire, and then discarded me when I became inconvenient. But you can't fire an architect from the building they designed, you can only lock them out of the office while They build a better one next door. The Dubai skyline gleamed like scattered diamonds against the morning sun as I rode the elevator to the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower. Teleregion's regional headquarters occupied the entire floor, and their conference room offered a view that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the edges of the desert. Ray Sato was already there when I arrived, his silver hair perfectly styled, his dark suit impeccable, but his eyes sharp with the kind of intelligence that cut through corporate nonsense like a laser through fog. He'd built Teleregion's cybersecurity division from the ground up and had zero patience for anything that wasn't technically sound. Arielle, he said, standing to shake my hand, I have to admit I was surprised by your message. Last I heard you were leading this project through Hyperion. I set my laptop on the conference table and smiled. Things change quickly in our industry, Ray. As I mentioned in my message, there have been some structural developments that I think will benefit everyone involved. Before he could respond, the elevator chimed and James Morrison from Hyperion's Middle East division walked in looking confused and slightly panicked. He was young, maybe 28, with the kind of nervous energy that screamed middle management. He'd clearly been expecting to find me here representing Hyperion. Arielle, thank God you're here, he said, rushing forward. I got your message about the client meeting, but I couldn't reach you through normal channels. My access to the project files seems to be restricted. And James, I interrupted gently, why don't you have a seat? I think there may have been some communication issues within your organization. Ray watched this exchange with growing interest, his eyes moving between James's obvious confusion and my calm composure. I could see the analytical wheels turning in his head. Perhaps we should begin, I said, opening my laptop. Ray, as you know, the original ArcBridge proposal was built around centralized cloud architecture, with security protocols managed through a single corporate entity, but I've been developing an alternative framework that offers something much more valuable: true data sovereignty. I turned the screen toward him, showing a clean technical diagram. Instead of your data flowing through Hyperion servers and being subject to their corporate policies and potential third-party access agreements, this framework creates isolated sovereign containers. Your data never leaves your control, never gets aggregated with other clients, never becomes part of a larger data pool that could be monetized or accessed by external parties. Ray leaned forward, immediately engaged. Show me the technical specifications. For the next 20 minutes I walked him through the architecture that Zane had been building in parallel to Hyperion's system, every security protocol, every encryption layer, every access control mechanism. James sat in growing confusion, occasionally trying to interject with questions about Hyperion's role in the presentation. This is impressive, Ray said finally, but I'm confused about the corporate structure. Who exactly is delivering this solution? I reached into my briefcase and placed a single business card on the table. Clean white stock with simple black lettering, Naira Core, with my name below it, founder and CEO. I've recently launched an independent venture focused specifically on sovereign data architecture. The technology you're seeing here is proprietary to Naira Core and unavailable through traditional corporate channels. James finally found his voice. Wait, Arielle, what's going on here? Are you representing Hyperion or not? I'm supposed to be co-presenting this meeting. I turned to him with genuine sympathy. James, the first think you should contact your headquarters. There seems to have been some confusion about staffing assignments for this project. Ray's expression had shifted from confusion to understanding to something that looked like respect. And the pricing structure, 30% below Hyperion's quoted rates, I said, with guaranteed data sovereignty, legally binding compliance frameworks, and direct technical support from the development team. No corporate layers, no account management fees, no hidden costs for future scaling. The room fell silent. James was frantically typing on his phone, probably trying to reach someone at Hyperion who could explain what was happening. Ray was studying the technical specifications with the focus of someone who understood exactly what he was looking at. I'll need to run this by my board, Ray said finally, but I have to say, Arielle, this addresses every concern I raised about the original proposal. The sovereignty guarantees alone are worth the conversation. I closed my laptop and stood. Take all the time you need. I'll be in the region for the next few days if you have additional questions. As I headed toward the elevator, James caught up with me. Arielle, seriously, what the hell is going on? Are you leaving Hyperion? What am I supposed to tell my manager? I pressed the button for the ground floor and turned to face him. James the First was terminated from Hyperion at 2:47 this morning via email, effective immediately. No explanation, no transition, no courtesy call. You might want to ask your interim CEO what happened to the person who built the very deal you're supposed to be presenting. The elevator doors closed on his shocked expression by the time I reached the hotel lobby. My phone was buzzing with messages from Zane confirming that the technical demo had performed flawlessly, from Verily, my legal strategist, confirming that all intellectual property protections were in place, and from Ray Sato himself. Arielle, this is exactly what we've been looking for. When can we schedule a follow-up? I smiled as I typed my response. Tomorrow if you'd like, but first let me ask you something. Would you rather work with a company that fires the architect of your project without warning, or with the architect directly? His response came back within minutes. I think you know the answer to that. The Conrad Singapore was everything you'd expect from a luxury hotel in the heart of the financial district. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble everything, and the kind of quiet that only came with serious money. I'd booked the executive suite not for the opulence but for the privacy. The kind of conversation I was about to have required absolute discretion. Verily arrived at exactly 7 p.m. carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the expression of someone who'd spent the day dismantling corporate structures with surgical precision. She was 42, brilliant, and had spent the last 5 years building legal frameworks for ethically driven startups after being passed over for partner at her previous firm due to what they'd called cultural fit issues. "You look remarkably calm for someone who was fired yesterday," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "I prefer to think of it as liberated," I replied, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "Tell me we're bulletproof." Vera opened her portfolio with the satisfaction of someone who'd anticipated every possible legal challenge. "More than bulletproof, we're legally untouchable. I've spent the last 8 months creating parallel documentation for everything you built at Hyperion, every technical specification, every client relationship, every piece of intellectual property has been properly protected under Naira Core's independent structure." She slid a thick folder across the table. "The framework you presented to Ray today, that's entirely original work developed outside of Hyperion's corporate structure using independent resources. The sovereign data architecture, the encryption protocols, the compliance systems, all of it was developed by Zane using his own equipment, his own time, and his own intellectual property." I flipped through the documentation, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. "And the client relationships, that's the beautiful part," Vera said with a slight smile. "Your relationships with Telorigin, Nextshore, and Eurosyn predate your work at Hyperion. They're based on personal trust, professional competence, and individual technical expertise, none of which are owned by any corporation. The non-compete clauses in your Hyperion contract specifically exclude relationships that existed before your employment and technical expertise that constitutes your individual professional capabilities." She pulled out another set of documents. "I've also prepared defensive documentation for the inevitable legal challenges. Hyperion will try to claim ownership of Project ArcBridge, but here's the problem. With that strategy, the project as they understand it doesn't actually exist. What they have is a proposal document and some preliminary technical specifications. What you have is a working system, actual client relationships, and binding legal frameworks. And if they try to sue, they'll discover that suing the architect of their most valuable project for using her own expertise to build something better is not great for corporate morale or client confidence," Vera said. "Plus I've documented every instance of intellectual property theft, every time they used your work without attribution, every time they promised you recognition and then gave it to someone else. Corporate litigation cuts both ways, and they have significantly more to lose." I felt something settle in my chest, not the cold anger from yesterday but a warm satisfaction that came with being thoroughly prepared. "What about Darren specifically?" Vera's expression darkened. "I've been tracking his internal communications. Since you gave me access to your email archives, he's been systematically undermining your position for months, spreading rumors about your stability, questioning your loyalty, suggesting to the board that you were becoming a flight risk. The termination wasn't impulsive, it was planned." She slid another document across the table. "But here's where it gets interesting. I have documentation showing that he's been in discussions with Meridian Partners about selling Hyperion's client portfolio. The ArcBridge deal isn't just revenue for them, it's the centerpiece of a larger acquisition strategy. They needed you to close the deal, and then they needed you gone before you could claim any ownership of the outcome. So this was never about performance or cultural fit, this was about erasing the architect before selling the building," Vera confirmed. "Which brings me to our next advantage. I've been in quiet contact with legal representatives for all 3 client companies. Standard due diligence for cross-border data compliance. They're all very interested in ensuring that their technical partner has stable long-term viability." She reached for her wine. "Elias Nwosu's team specifically asked about the longevity of key personnel on the project. They were concerned about brain drain at Hyperion. I took the liberty of suggesting that the most stable approach would be working directly with the technical team rather than through corporate intermediaries." "You didn't?" "I absolutely did, and his legal team agreed. They're scheduling a call with you tomorrow morning Lagos time to discuss alternative partnership structures." I felt the pieces clicking into place like a complex puzzle suddenly revealing its pattern. "How long do we have before Hyperion realizes what's happening?" "They're already starting to figure it out," Vera said. "James Morrison filed a confused incident report about your Dubai meeting. Darren's been trying to reach the clients directly but they're not returning his calls, and their legal team just realized that most of the technical documentation for ArcBridge is missing from their servers." "Missing? Well, you can't steal your own work," Vera said with a perfectly straight face, "especially when that work was created using independent resources and protected under separate intellectual property frameworks. The files they're looking for never belonged to them in the first place." I raised my glass. "To legal architecture, to legal architecture," she agreed, "and to the fact that sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people face the consequences of their own actions." As Vera gathered her documents, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete professional Confidence not just in my technical abilities but in my right to use them. The legal framework wasn't just protection, it was permission to build something better, to claim ownership of my own expertise, to stop asking for recognition and start demanding respect. One more thing, Vera said as she reached the door. Meena Kapoor from Meridian Partners has been asking questions about you specifically. She seems to think there might be opportunities for collaboration once this settles out. Interesting. Vera agreed. I get the feeling she's watched this kind of corporate chess game before and knows how it usually ends. After she left, I stood at the window looking out at Singapore's glittering skyline, each light representing someone working late, someone building something, someone trying to make their mark on an industry that ate talent and discarded loyalty. But tonight felt different. Tonight I wasn't just another ambitious executive climbing someone else's ladder. I was an architect with my own blueprint, a strategist with my own game plan, a founder with my own company. Tomorrow I would call Elias Nwosu and offer him something Hyperion never could: true partnership built on mutual respect rather than corporate extraction. They thought they could use me to build their empire and then erase me from the story they were about to learn. The difference between using someone and understanding them. The flight from Singapore to Lagos took 14 hours but felt like a meditation. As the plane crossed continents, I found myself thinking not about the deal but about the man I was going to see. Elias Nwosu had built Nextshore from nothing, starting with a single server in his university dorm room and growing it into Africa's most trusted sovereign data company. He understood something that Silicon Valley executives never seemed to grasp, that technology without cultural context was just expensive colonialism. I'd first met Elias 3 years ago during what the tech press had called the Lagos data crisis. A coalition of European firms had attempted to force Nextshore into a compliance framework that would have given them access to over 2 million African citizens' personal information. The legal pressure was immense, the financial pressure worse, and most American consultants were advising Elias to cave. Instead, he'd reached out to me through a mutual contact, asking for someone who understood both technical architecture and political sensitivity. I'd spent 2 weeks in Lagos not just reviewing the legal frameworks but learning the cultural context, understanding why data sovereignty wasn't just a business issue but a matter of national dignity. Together we'd built a compliance system that met every international requirement while keeping all data processing within African borders. We'd turned a crisis into a competitive advantage and established Nextshore as the gold standard for ethical data handling. The European coalition had backed down and Elias had become one of the most respected voices in global tech policy. Now I was asking him to trust me again. The Lagos skyline at sunset was breathtaking, modern glass towers rising from ancient foundations, the Atlantic Ocean stretching endlessly to the horizon. I took a taxi directly from the airport to the restaurant. Elias had suggested a quiet place in Victoria Island known for its privacy and its excellent jollof rice. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table that offered both discretion and a clear view of anyone entering the restaurant. At 55, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd built something lasting. His gray beard was perfectly trimmed, his white shirt crisp, but his eyes held the wariness of someone who'd survived too many corporate betrayals. Arielle, he said, standing to embrace me, you look well considering the circumstances. You heard. The tech world is smaller than most people think, especially when it comes to major deals going sideways. He gestured for me to sit. I received some interesting communications from your former colleagues at Hyperion, very concerned about project continuity, very eager to assure me that your departure wouldn't affect our partnership. I felt a chill. What did you tell them? I told them I'd speak with you directly before making any decisions, Elias said, which brings us to why you're here. Tell me what really happened. Over the next hour I laid out everything, the 18 months I'd spent building Project ArcBridge, the systematic erasure of my contributions, the termination without warning or explanation, the discovery that Darren had been planning my exit for months as part of a larger acquisition strategy. Elias listened without interruption, occasionally nodding but mostly just absorbing, taking in not just the facts but the emotional reality of professional betrayal. And now you're proposing what exactly? He asked. Finally, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a tablet showing Naira Core's technical specifications: direct partnership, sovereign data architecture that keeps all African data processing within African borders, technical specifications designed specifically for your operational requirements, and most importantly, a partnership structure that treats you as an equal stakeholder rather than a client to be managed. Elias studied the documentation with the careful attention of someone who understood that details mattered. This is impressive, but it raises obvious questions. Can you deliver what you're promising with a startup infrastructure? Can you handle the scale we require? And perhaps most importantly, can I trust that you won't disappear when a bigger opportunity comes along? The last question hit harder than I'd expected because it was fair. Every consultant, every technical partner, every American expert who'd worked with African companies had eventually moved on to more prestigious opportunities, leaving local teams to maintain systems they hadn't designed. Elias, I said finally, 3 years ago you were facing pressure to compromise your principles for economic expediency. You chose integrity over convenience even when it would have been easier to cave. You built something that mattered more than something that made money. I'm asking you to trust that I understand the difference." He leaned back in his chair studying me. "And if Hyperion comes back with a better offer, if they promise you your job back, if they offer to make you a partner?" "They won't," I said, "because they can't. They fundamentally don't understand that this was never about money or titles. It was about building something that respects the people it serves, and they've proven they're incapable of that kind of respect." Elias was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the Lego skyline. "You know what convinced me to work with you the first time? It wasn't your technical expertise, though that was impressive. It was that you spent 2 weeks learning about our context before proposing any solutions. Most consultants show up with predetermined answers. You showed up with intelligent questions." He turned back to me. "I'm going to ask you some questions now, and I need completely honest answers. Can your infrastructure handle 300 million data points processed simultaneously? Can you guarantee regulatory compliance across 15 different African jurisdictions? Can you provide technical support in multiple time zones without requiring our teams to adapt to American business hours?" "Yes, yes, and yes," I replied, "but more than that, I can guarantee that every technical decision will be made with African data sovereignty as the primary consideration, not as an afterthought or compliance requirement." "And the business structure?" "Equal partnership," I said, "shared revenue based on actual value delivered, not on corporate hierarchy." Nextshore maintains complete ownership of its data and client relationships. Naira Core provides technical infrastructure and compliance support. "You're not a client, you're a partner." Elias smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "You know what I appreciate most about this conversation? You haven't once promised me that working with Naira Core will make us more like Silicon Valley. You're promising that it will help us be better at being ourselves." "That's exactly what I'm promising." He reached for his phone. "I'm going to make some calls tonight, speak with my board, get their input. But Arielle, I want you to know something. When Hyperion reached out to me after your termination, the first thing I thought was that they'd just made the stupidest decision in corporate history. You don't fire the architect in the middle of building the cathedral." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "What was the second thing you thought?" "That maybe this was exactly the opportunity we'd been waiting for," he said, "a chance to work with the architect directly without having to navigate corporate politics or worry about ulterior motives." As we walked out of the restaurant together, I felt something I hadn't experienced since starting Project ArcBridge 18 months ago: genuine excitement about the work itself, not just the deal but the possibility of building something that mattered. "One more question," Elias said as we reached the street. "What happens to Hyperion when their 3 biggest clients sign with you instead?" I thought about Darren Roque sitting in his executive office, probably drafting press releases about seamless leadership transitions, probably convinced that he'd successfully eliminated a threat to his authority. "I think they're about to learn something important about the difference between managing people and managing relationships," I said. "People you can fire, relationships you have to earn." Elias laughed. "I look forward to seeing how that lesson plays out." As my taxi pulled away from the restaurant, I opened my encrypted phone and found messages from both Ray in Tokyo and Linda in Amsterdam, both asking for follow-up calls, both expressing interest in exploring alternative partnership structures. 3 clients, 3 continents, 1 shared understanding that corporate loyalty was a two-way street. Hyperion had taught me an important lesson about institutional power. They'd shown me exactly how disposable I was in their corporate structure. Now I was about to show them exactly how portable their most valuable relationships really were. The Hyperion 9 headquarters in Manhattan was everything a billion-dollar company's flagship office should be: 53 floors of glass and steel rising above the Hudson River. Executive floors with views that stretched from Central Park to the Statue of Liberty, marble lobbies and crystal chandeliers, and the kind of calculated luxury that whispered rather than shouted about corporate success. I hadn't been invited to the Global Strategy Summit. I came anyway. The 32nd floor was transformed for the occasion: round tables draped in white linens, crystal glasses catching the afternoon light, and 200 of the industry's most influential players networking over champagne and carefully crafted talking points. The kind of event where deals worth hundreds of millions were discussed over canapes and handshakes. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, familiar faces turning toward me with expressions ranging from confusion to surprise to carefully calculated politeness. Word had traveled fast in our incestuous industry, and everyone knew that Arielle Vance was no longer with Hyperion, but no one was quite sure what that meant or how they should react. "Arielle," came a voice behind me. I turned to find Marcus Chen from Deutsche Bank, his expression genuinely warm. "I heard you'd made some changes. Good for you. Sometimes the best thing you can do is bet on yourself." "Something like that," I replied, accepting his handshake. "How's the European expansion going?" "Slower than we'd like, but we're being careful about compliance frameworks," he said. "Actually, we should talk. I've been looking for someone with your expertise on sovereign data architecture, someone who understands Both the technical requirements and the political sensitivities. Before I could respond, a hush fell over the room and all eyes turned toward the small stage at the far end. Darren Roque had taken the microphone, his smile bright and confident, his manner suggesting a man completely in control of his narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for what I believe will be a historic announcement," he began. "Over the past 18 months, Hyperion has been developing what we believe is the most ambitious cross-continental data integration project ever attempted. Project ArcBridge represents not just a technical achievement but a new model for global cooperation." I felt something cold settle in my stomach as he continued. "This project required vision, it required technical expertise, and most importantly, it required the kind of leadership that could navigate complex cultural and regulatory frameworks across 3 continents. I'm proud to announce that Project ArcBridge is moving into its final implementation phase with partnerships confirmed across Tokyo, Lagos, and Amsterdam." The applause was polite but enthusiastic. Marcus Chin raised an eyebrow. "Wasn't that your project?" he whispered. "Every word of it," I murmured back. Darren continued his presentation, showing slides I recognized, technical diagrams I'd created, compliance frameworks I'd designed, client testimonials I'd cultivated over months of careful relationship building. My work presented as corporate achievement, my expertise transformed into institutional capability, and I'm especially excited to introduce our newest strategic partner," Darren said, "someone who will be helping us expand our global reach and deepen our cultural competency." Meena Kapoor from Meridian Partners, the woman who walked onto the stage, was striking, tall, confident, with the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. She was perhaps 35, with sharp, intelligent eyes and the fluid grace of someone who'd learned to navigate corporate politics without losing her authenticity. "Thank you, Darren," she said, taking the microphone. "I'm thrilled to be working with Hyperion on what I believe will be a transformative approach to international data architecture. The relationships they've built, the technical frameworks they've developed, and the cultural sensitivity they've demonstrated make them the ideal partner for the kind of complex global integration that defines our industry's future." I watched her speak and felt a strange combination of admiration and concern. She was clearly brilliant, clearly capable, and clearly walking into exactly the same trap I'd spent 2 years navigating. The token diverse hire brought in to provide credibility for projects she hadn't designed, working with people who would use her expertise and then discard her the moment it became convenient. As the formal presentation ended and the crowd dispersed into smaller networking clusters, I found myself approaching the bar where Meena stood alone checking her phone. She looked up as I approached and I saw recognition flicker in her eyes. "Arielle Vance," she said, extending her hand. "I've heard a lot about you." "I'm sure you have," I replied, "though I'm curious which version you heard." She smiled, and it was genuine. "The version where you're brilliant, difficult, and recently made some enemies in corporate leadership, or the version where you're unstable, unreliable, and recently made some poor career choices? Take your pick. Both probably contain some truth," I said. "What's your version?" Meena considered this carefully. "My version is that you built something impressive, got screwed over by people who couldn't match your competence, and are now in the process of showing them exactly what they lost, which, if I'm right, makes you either very dangerous or very valuable, depending on which side of the equation you're on." I felt a spark of respect for her directness. "And which side are you on?" "That's what I'm trying to figure out," she said. "Can I buy you coffee tomorrow somewhere away from all this corporate theater? I'd like to hear your perspective on some things." Before I could answer, Darren appeared beside us, his smile bright but his eyes cold. "Arielle, what a surprise. I didn't realize you were invited to today's event." "I wasn't," I said simply, "but Marcus Chin wanted to discuss some potential collaboration and I thought it would be rude to refuse." Darren's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Well, I hope you enjoyed the presentation. It's exciting to see how Project ArcBridge is evolving." "Fascinating to watch," I agreed, "especially the attribution of technical innovations. It's always interesting to see how institutional memory develops around complex projects." Meena's eyes moved between us, clearly sensing the undercurrent of tension. "Darren, perhaps we could schedule some time next week to discuss the cultural integration aspects of the project. I have some questions about the technical frameworks." "Absolutely," Darren said, "though I should mention that we've made some personnel changes recently that have actually strengthened our technical capabilities. The current team is really hitting their stride." I felt the dismissal like a physical blow but kept my expression neutral. "Well, I should let you get back to your guests," I said. "Meena, it was lovely meeting you." As I walked toward the elevator, I heard Meena excuse herself from Darren and catch up with me. "That coffee tomorrow," she said quietly. "I think we really need to talk." "I think you're right," I agreed. The elevator doors closed and I found myself alone with my reflection in the polished steel somewhere above me. Darren was probably congratulating himself on handling an awkward situation smoothly. Somewhere in the corporate suites, executives were toasting the success of Project ArcBridge without once mentioning the architect who designed every component. But 32 floors below, in the marble lobby, I pulled out my encrypted phone and sent 3 carefully crafted messages to 3 Global partners who still believed that loyalty was a two-way street, the choice is still yours, each message read, but the window is closing. By the time I reached the street, all three had responded, ready to proceed. From Ray in Tokyo, board meeting scheduled for tomorrow. From Elias in Lagos, send the contracts. From Linda in Amsterdam, I smiled as Manhattan's evening lights began to flicker on around me. Darren had thrown a party to celebrate stealing my work. My clients had just voted to give it back. The momentum started quietly. Like most revolutions, it began not with dramatic announcements but with small administrative changes that only looked significant if you knew what to watch for. Monday morning, Ray Sato sent a technical inquiry to Hyperion's infrastructure team asking for detailed specifications on data sovereignty protocols that didn't exist in their system. Tuesday afternoon, Elias Nwosu's legal team requested clarification on third-party data access policies that Hyperion had never considered. Wednesday evening, Linda Clark from Eurosyn politely declined to renew the preliminary security clearances that would have allowed Hyperion to begin processing European data under their existing framework. By Thursday morning, Hyperion's project management team was starting to panic. I watched it unfold from my temporary office space in a WeWork in Soho, 27 floors below Hyperion's headquarters, but operating in a completely different universe. I'd taken a corner desk with a view of the Hudson River and spent my days orchestrating the careful technical ballet that would transition three major clients from one corporate structure to another. Infrastructure tests are running beautifully, Zane reported during our morning video call. He was in his home office in Portland, surrounded by the kind of high-end server equipment that most people associated with gaming, but he used to build enterprise-level data architecture. Tell Origins. Test data migrated flawlessly yesterday, and Ray's team confirmed that the sovereignty protocols are performing exactly as specified. What about compliance frameworks? Vera finished the African regulatory documentation last night, he said. Nextshores legal team reviewed everything and gave us full approval for production deployment. Their board meeting is this afternoon, but Elias seemed confident about the outcome when we talked yesterday. I felt a familiar thrill, the same satisfaction I'd experienced during the early days of Project ArcBridge, when every technical challenge yielded to careful analysis and creative problem solving. And Eurosyn, Linda's team, is being more cautious, but that's just good business, Zane said. They want to see proof of concept before committing to full migration, but their technical audit yesterday went perfectly and they're scheduling production tests for next week. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a message from Linda herself. Arielle, your technical team's responsiveness is extraordinary. We submitted a compliance question at 4 a.m. Amsterdam time and had a detailed technical response within 2 hours, including code examples. How is that possible with a startup infrastructure? I typed back quickly. We don't have layers of corporate bureaucracy between the technical team and the client questions. You're working directly with the people who built the system. Her response was immediate. That explains a lot. Can we schedule a call this afternoon to discuss production timeline? Meanwhile, my other phone was buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from Hyperion's account management team. James Morrison had been calling repeatedly, trying to schedule alignment meetings with all three clients. Sarah Chen from corporate communications wanted to discuss messaging coordination, and Marcus Webb from legal was requesting copies of all client communications for compliance review. I'd been ignoring them, but their desperation was starting to show. Arielle, please call me back. James's latest voicemail began. I don't understand what's happening with the client relationships. Everyone seems confused about project status and I can't get clear answers from anyone about technical specifications. The clients keep asking questions I can't answer and requesting documentation I can't find. I really need to understand what's going on. I almost felt sorry for him. James was a decent account manager caught in the middle of a corporate power play. He didn't understand he'd been hired to maintain relationships, not to architect them, and now he was discovering the difference. But my sympathy had limits. Technical specifications update completed, came a message from Vera. All three clients now have legally binding contracts with Naira Core for technical consultation services, completely separate from their arrangements with Hyperion and completely within the scope of your individual professional expertise. What does that mean practically? It means that every technical question they ask, every compliance framework they need, every system integration they require goes through Naira Core rather than Hyperion. We're not competing with them yet, we're just providing specialized technical services that they can't deliver yet, Vera confirmed. But Arielle, this morning's legal review flagged something interesting. Hyperion's contracts with all three clients include performance benchmarks for data processing speed, security, compliance, and system reliability. If they can't meet those benchmarks within the specified timeframes, the clients have the right to terminate and seek alternative providers, and they can't meet the benchmarks. They can't even understand the benchmarks, Vera said with satisfaction. Because the technical specifications were written by you using architecture, they don't possess the performance standards they agreed to require. Exactly the kind Of sovereign data processing that only Naira Core can deliver. I felt pieces clicking into place like a complex puzzle revealing its final pattern. So we're not stealing their clients, we're fulfilling their contracts, Vera confirmed, which they can't do without us. That afternoon I met Meena Kapoor at a quiet cafe in the village far from the corporate towers of Midtown. She arrived exactly on time carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the expression of someone who'd spent the morning asking uncomfortable questions. "Thank you for making time," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "I've been doing some research since our conversation yesterday and I have to say your reputation is fascinating." "Which version of my reputation?" "The one where you single-handedly salvaged 3 impossible deals in 18 months, she said. "The one where you speak 4 languages and understand 6 different regulatory frameworks. The one where clients specifically request you by name for projects involving cultural sensitivity and technical complexity." She paused to sip her coffee. "And also the version where you were terminated without warning from a project you'd spent 18 months building by an interim CEO who's been with the company for less than 6 months. Both versions are accurate." "That's what I was afraid of," Meena said. "Arielle, I'm going to be direct with you because I think we're both too smart for corporate doublespeak. I was brought into Hyperion to provide diversity optics for Project ArcBridge. They needed someone who looked like global leadership to present alongside Darren's vision of American technical superiority." I felt a chill of recognition. "And now I'm discovering that the technical architecture I'm supposed to be endorsing was designed by someone they fired," she said. "The client relationships I'm supposed to be managing were built by someone they erased from the presentation, and the cultural sensitivity I'm supposed to be demonstrating was learned by someone they've systematically excluded from corporate leadership." She leaned forward. "I'm walking into exactly the same trap you spent 2 years navigating, aren't I?" "Probably," I said honestly, "though you have advantages I didn't. You see the pattern earlier and you're asking better questions. What would you do in my position?" I considered this carefully. I'd ask myself whether I wanted to be the face of someone else's vision or the architect of my own, and then I'd decide whether Hyperion offers the kind of partnership that respects what I bring to the table or the kind that uses what I bring to validate what they've already decided. Meena was quiet for a long moment. "What are you building, Arielle?" "Really, something better," I said simply. "Something that treats expertise as partnership rather than extraction. Something that values long-term relationships over short-term profits. Something that understands the difference between managing people and managing systems." "And you think you can compete with a billion-dollar corporation?" "I think I can build better solutions with people who share my values than they can build with people who share their politics," I said. "The question isn't whether I can compete, the question is whether they can deliver what they've promised without the person who designed it." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a message from Ray. "Production migration scheduled for Monday. Hyperion's technical team seems confused about the requirements. Can Naira Core provide direct support?" I showed Meena the message. "They're about to find out." "Jesus," she murmured, "you're not just leaving them, you're taking the institutional knowledge with you." "I'm taking my own expertise," I corrected, "which they never owned in the first place. They just assumed they could use it indefinitely without acknowledging where it came from." Meena stared at her coffee for a long moment. "If I were to hypothetically explore alternative options, what would that look like?" "It would look like deciding whether you want to spend the next 2 years building other people's dreams or your own," I said. "And then it would look like a conversation about partnership rather than employment." She reached into her portfolio and pulled out a folded document. "I printed my contract this morning after our conversation yesterday. The termination clause is very simple. They can fire me at any time for any reason with 2 weeks' notice, no explanation required, no transition period guaranteed, just like mine was, just like yours was," she confirmed, "which makes me think that maybe loyalty is less important than leverage." As we walked out of the cafe together, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my termination: hope, not just for Naira Core's success but for the possibility of building something that respected the people who built it. "One more question," Meena said as we reached the street. "What happens to Darren when this all plays out?" I thought about the interim CEO sitting in his corner office, probably drafting press releases about seamless project management, probably convinced that technical expertise was replaceable as long as you had the right corporate messaging. "I think he's about to learn an important lesson about the difference between owning a relationship and managing one," I said, "and about what happens when you fire the person who actually built what you're trying to sell." Meena laughed. "I'd like to see that lesson unfold." "You will," I said, "starting Monday morning when 3 major clients discover that Hyperion can't deliver what they promised and Naira Core can." As I watched her walk away, I felt the familiar satisfaction of pieces falling into place, not just the technical architecture or the legal frameworks but the human relationships that made complex deals actually work. People who understood that expertise wasn't just a corporate asset to be managed but a personal capability to be respected. People who knew the difference between using someone and partnering with them. People who were ready to build something better. My phone buzzed with final confirmations from all 3 clients: production migrations scheduled, legal frameworks approved, Technical specifications validated. Hyperion had fired the architect of their most valuable project on Monday morning. They were going to discover exactly what they'd built without her. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning when Linda Clark from Eurosyn failed to return 3 consecutive calls from Hyperion's account management team. By Wednesday, James Morrison was sending increasingly desperate emails asking for status updates on technical alignment. By Thursday, Darren Roque himself was placing direct calls to Amsterdam only to reach voicemail messages in Dutch that his assistant couldn't translate. I watched it unfold from my temporary office with the detached fascination of someone observing a controlled demolition. Each missed call, each unanswered email, each failed attempt to reach clients who had once responded within hours was another support beam giving way in a structure that had always been more fragile than it appeared. Their legal team is getting creative. Vera reported during our morning call, I received a cease and desist letter yesterday claiming that Naira Corp is engaging in corporate sabotage and client interference. They're threatening litigation for breach of fiduciary duty. What did you tell them? I told them to review the definition of fiduciary duty, Vera said with obvious satisfaction, specifically the part about acting in someone's best interests rather than your own, and then I reminded them that filing frivolous lawsuits against former employees tends to generate exactly the kind of media attention that corporate clients prefer to avoid. She paused. I also mentioned that discovery in such a lawsuit would require them to produce all internal communications about your termination, including the planning documents that show it was premeditated corporate retaliation rather than performance-based management, and their response, radio silence, Vera said. Funny how quickly corporate lawyers lose interest in litigation when they realize they'd be deposing their own CEO about systematic discrimination and retaliation practices. Meanwhile, my phone was buzzing with updates from all 3 client relationships. Ray Sato had completed the technical migration over the weekend, and Telorigin systems were now running entirely on Naira Corp's sovereign architecture. Elias Nwosu had received unanimous board approval for the partnership transition, and Nextshore was scheduled to go live on Friday. Linda Clark's team was moving more cautiously, but her latest message confirmed that Eurosyn's compliance review had found Naira Corp's framework significantly superior to previously proposed alternatives. But the most interesting development wasn't technical. It was personal. Coffee today, read a text from Meena Kapoor. I have news. We met at the same cafe in the village, though this time Meena arrived carrying not just her leather portfolio but also a cardboard box that looked suspiciously like the kind used for clearing out office desks. I resigned this morning, she said without preamble, effective immediately. No transition period, no exit interview, just a letter on Darren's desk explaining that I couldn't in good conscience represent technical capabilities that don't exist to clients who deserve better. I felt a surge of respect mixed with concern. That was brave, that was necessary, Meena corrected. Yesterday I sat in a strategy meeting where Darren spent 40 minutes explaining how they were going to rebuild Project ArcBridge's technical framework using internal resources and proven methodologies. The man was describing rebuilding a cathedral using Lincoln logs and genuinely seemed to believe it was possible. She opened her portfolio and pulled out a printed email. This morning I received this from their head of human resources. Apparently my resignation has triggered some kind of corporate investigation into external influences on employee loyalty. They want to interview everyone who's had contact with you in the past month. Are you worried? I'm fascinated, Meena said. The idea that they think employee loyalty is something that can be investigated rather than earned tells you everything you need to know about their management philosophy. She leaned forward. Arielle, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday about partnership versus employment, about building something that respects expertise rather than extracting it, and I'd like to explore what that might look like, she said, not as someone running from Hyperion but as someone running towards something better. Before I could respond, my phone rang with a call from an unknown international number. I almost declined it, but something made me answer. Ms. Vance, this is Tomoko Ishikawa from the Nikkei Technology Review, came a crisp professional voice. I'm calling regarding some developments in the American fintech sector, specifically around Project ArcBridge and recent corporate leadership changes. We understand that there have been some significant personnel transitions, and we're hoping to get your perspective on how these changes might affect international partnerships. I felt my pulse quicken. I'm not sure I'm the right person to comment on corporate personnel decisions. Actually, we believe you're exactly the right person, Ms. Ishikawa said. Our research indicates that you were the primary architect of the technical frameworks that made Project ArcBridge possible, and that your recent departure from Hyperion has coincided with some interesting developments in client relationships. We're particularly interested in your perspective on sovereign data architecture and its implications for cross-cultural business partnerships. I glanced at Meena, who was watching with obvious interest. I appreciate your interest, but I'm not prepared to make any public statements at this time. Of course, Ms. Ishikawa said, but perhaps you could Clarify something for our readers. There are reports that several major international firms are transitioning their technical partnerships away from Hyperion and toward independent providers. Can you comment on whether this represents a broader trend in the industry? I think you'd have to ask those firms directly about their decision-making processes, I said carefully, but I will say that sophisticated clients increasingly value technical expertise over corporate branding. They want to work with the people who actually built the systems they're licensing rather than the people who manage the licensing agreements. After I hung up, Mina was staring at me with something that looked like awe. A major Japanese business publication is investigating Hyperion's client relationships. Word travels fast in international business, I said, especially when major partnerships start dissolving without clear explanations. This is going to be a story, isn't it? Mina said, not just about corporate mismanagement but about what happens when you try to sell expertise you don't actually possess. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Arielle, this is Elias writing from personal phone. Corporate communications at Hyperion have been calling non-stop since yesterday, trying to schedule emergency meetings with our board. They seem very concerned about project continuity and want to discuss enhanced partnership terms. The desperation is quite remarkable. I showed the message to Mina, who laughed out loud. Enhanced partnership terms translation: they're finally ready to offer what they should have provided from the beginning. Too late though, way too late, Mina agreed. You know what I find most satisfying about this whole situation? It's not that they're failing, it's that they're failing so predictably. Every move they make just confirms that they never understood what they had when they had you. She reached into her cardboard box and pulled out a sleek laptop. I kept this when I resigned company equipment that I'd loaded with my own research and contacts. They asked for it back, but I told them I needed to wipe personal files first, and while I was wiping personal files I may have noticed that their internal project management system still has you listed as the primary technical contact for all three major client relationships, she said with a slight smile. Apparently no one updated the access permissions when they fired you. I felt a chill of possibility. What kind of access? Full administrative access to client communications, technical specifications, compliance documentation, Mina said. Everything they'd need to actually deliver what they promised, which they can't access without me, which they can't access without you, she confirmed. And based on this morning's technical audit reports, they're just now realizing how much they never knew about their own systems. As we walked out of the cafe together, I felt the final pieces of a complex puzzle clicking into place, not just the technical architecture or the legal frameworks, but the human elements that made sustainable business relationships actually work. Trust earned through competence rather than claimed through authority, partnership built on mutual respect rather than imposed through corporate hierarchy, leadership demonstrated through results rather than announced through press releases. One more thing, Mina said as we reached the street. I may have accidentally forwarded some internal Hyperion emails to my personal account before wiping my company laptop. Strategy documents that show exactly how they plan to use both of us as diversity window dressing before pushing us aside. That seems ethically questionable. That seems like documentation of systematic discrimination that should probably be shared with labor attorneys, Mina corrected, but only if someone were planning to pursue legal remedies, which I'm definitely not suggesting. I smiled as Manhattan's afternoon light caught the glass towers around us. You know what I think I like about working with you already? What's that? You understand the difference between following rules and following principles. I learned that from watching how they treated you, Mina said. Sometimes the most ethical thing you can do is refuse to participate in someone else's unethical system. That evening I sat in my apartment overlooking the Hudson River watching the lights of New Jersey flicker on across the water. 3 client relationships, secured legal protections, confirmed technical infrastructure, validated a potential new partner who understood both the business and the principles. And somewhere across the city, Darren Roque was probably sitting in his corner office drafting press releases about strategic realignments and enhanced partnerships, completely unaware that the empire he thought he controlled had already declared independence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, for the first time since receiving that termination email, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete professional confidence in my own vision. They'd fired the architect. Tomorrow they'd discover what they'd actually built without her. The press release went live at exactly 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, just as the global financial markets were opening in London, and 3 hours before most American executives would check their phones. A simple, elegant announcement that appeared simultaneously on Naira Cor's newly launched website and in the inboxes of technology journalists across 3 continents. Naira Cor announces successful completion of Project ArcBridge implementation through strategic partnerships with Telorigin, Nextshore and Eurosyn, representing $1.8 billion in cross-continental data integration services. Founder and CEO Arielle Vance will lead technical operations from New York, with regional offices planned for Tokyo, Lagos and Amsterdam. No mention of Hyperion, no reference to corporate Transitions, no acknowledgement that this project had ever belonged to anyone else, just clean professional language describing accomplished facts. I watched the response unfold from my apartment with coffee and the kind of quiet satisfaction that comes with watching a carefully orchestrated plan reach its natural conclusion. The first notification came from TechCrunch at 6:47 a.m. Breaking: former Hyperion strategist launches independent firm captures $1.8 deal. The second from Reuters at 7:15. Major fintech clients migrate to startup founded by ex-Hyperion executive. By 8 a.m. the story was trending on LinkedIn and generating the kind of industry buzz that usually accompanied major mergers or acquisitions, but the most satisfying response came at 8:32 a.m. from my former colleague Marcus Chen at Deutsche Bank. Arielle, congratulations on the announcement. This explains a lot about recent market activity. Would love to discuss potential collaboration when things settle down. Followed immediately by a message from Elena Rodriguez at Singapore Financial. Brilliant move on the sovereign architecture framework. We've been looking for exactly this kind of solution for our Southeast Asian expansion. And then a text from Tomoko Ishikawa at Nikkei. Ms. Vance, would you be available for a brief phone interview regarding today's announcement? I think our readers would be very interested in your perspective on independent technical expertise versus corporate institutional knowledge. I was drafting responses when my phone rang with a call from Zane in Portland. The website traffic is insane, he reported. We've had 6,000 unique visitors since 6 a.m. and the inquiry form has received 43 serious business development requests, most of them referencing specific technical capabilities and asking about availability for custom implementations. Any system issues? None whatsoever, Zane said with obvious pride. The architecture is handling everything beautifully. Even got a message from Ray Sato's team in Tokyo saying their Monday morning data processing ran 30% faster than benchmark specifications, and Hyperion radio silence from their technical team, but their marketing department has been very busy, he said. 3 different press releases in the past 2 hours about strategic realignments, enhanced partnerships, and commitment to innovation, each one more desperate than the last. I opened my laptop and navigated to Hyperion's corporate website where their latest announcement was prominently featured. Hyperion 9 remains committed to delivering world-class technical solutions through strategic partnerships and proven methodologies. We continue to work closely with our valued clients to ensure seamless project implementation and enhanced service delivery. Corporate speak that said absolutely nothing while trying to sound like everything was under control, but the real story was in what they weren't saying. No mention of Project ArcBridge. No reference to client relationships, no acknowledgement that their most valuable deal had just walked out the door. Vera's been monitoring their legal communications, I told Zane. Apparently they're scrambling to find technical experts who can reverse engineer our architecture so they can claim independent development. Good luck with that, Zane laughed. You'd need to understand not just the code but the regulatory framework, the cultural context, and the specific client requirements. We build custom solutions for each partnership. You can't just copy and paste sovereignty. As if summoned by our conversation, my phone buzzed with a message from Mina. Have you seen the internal Hyperion emails that leaked to TechCrunch? 20 minutes of Darren losing his mind about competitive sabotage and corporate espionage. Apparently he's convinced you somehow stole proprietary technology and client relationships. I clicked the link she'd sent to find a devastating piece of technology journalism that laid out the entire timeline. Arielle Vance's role in developing Project ArcBridge, her systematic exclusion from corporate recognition, her termination without warning or explanation, and the subsequent migration of all major client relationships to her independent firm. The article included quotes from industry experts about the rarity of such complete client loyalty and the technical expertise required to pull off such a seamless transition, but the most damaging element was a sidebar that compared Hyperion's public statements about the project with documented evidence of Vance's actual contributions. According to internal documents reviewed by TechCrunch, the article noted Vance was responsible for the initial technical architecture, all client relationship development, and the regulatory compliance frameworks that made international implementation possible. Her departure appears to have left Hyperion without the institutional knowledge necessary to maintain these complex partnerships. The article concluded with a quote from an unnamed industry analyst. This case study illustrates the difference between owning a relationship and managing one. Hyperion owned the contracts, but Vance owned the expertise. When sophisticated clients have to choose between corporate branding and technical competence, they choose competence every time. By noon my phone was ringing constantly. Business development inquiries from firms I'd never heard of, interview requests from technology publications, congratulatory messages from former colleagues who'd watched my erasure from Hyperion with uncomfortable recognition. But the most meaningful message came from Elias Nwosu. Arielle, the press coverage today has been remarkable, but more importantly this morning's system performance exceeded every benchmark we discussed. Our board is convinced that partnering with Naira Core was the best business decision we've made in years. Thank you for showing us what true Technical partnership looks like. Similar messages arrived from Ray in Tokyo and Linda in Amsterdam, each confirming not just satisfaction with the technical implementation but relief at working with partners who prioritized functionality over corporate politics. The most beautiful part, Mina said when she called that afternoon, is that they're discovering in real time that they never actually understood what they had. You weren't just an employee, you were the entire competitive advantage. What's Darren saying internally? According to the TechCrunch leak, he's blaming everyone except himself, Mina said, the board for not supporting talent retention, HR for inadequate employee engagement, legal for failing to protect intellectual property, but never acknowledging that maybe firing your most valuable technical expert without warning wasn't a brilliant strategic move, and the other executives, jumping ship as fast as they can, Mina said. Sarah Chen from Communications submitted her resignation this morning. James Morrison from Account Management is apparently updating his LinkedIn profile, and Marcus Webb from Legal has been scheduling meetings with headhunters. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sympathy. Satisfaction because the consequences were entirely predictable, and entirely deserved sympathy because watching institutional collapse was never pleasant even when the institution had earned its fate. One more thing, Mina said, I may have received a call from a venture capital firm this afternoon. Meridian Partners apparently thinks there might be investment opportunities in sovereign data architecture. They're particularly interested in firms led by founders with proven track records of building complex international partnerships. And your response? My response was that they should probably talk to the founder and CEO of Naira Core directly, Mina said. I may have mentioned that I'm now serving as Director of Strategic Growth, and that we're always interested in discussions with investors who understand the long-term value of technical excellence over short-term profit maximization. As the afternoon sun slanted through my apartment windows, I found myself thinking not about revenge or vindication but about possibility, about building something that respected expertise rather than extracting it, about creating partnerships based on mutual benefit rather than corporate hierarchy, about proving that quiet competence could triumph over loud mediocrity. The press coverage would fade, the industry buzz would move on to other stories, but the relationships I'd built, the systems I'd designed, and the principles I'd defended would endure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that doing the right thing was also the smart thing. But today, for the first time since receiving that termination email, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete ownership of my own professional narrative. They'd tried to erase me from the story I'd built. Instead, I'd shown the world exactly whose story it had always been. The Global Cloud Summit in Munich was the kind of event where billion-dollar partnerships were forged over breakfast and entire industries pivoted. During coffee breaks, 2,000 of the world's most influential technology leaders gathered in the Bavarian International Conference Center for 3 days of presentations, networking, and the careful diplomatic dance that passed for competition. In enterprise software, I hadn't been invited, but Naira Core had. The invitation arrived 2 weeks after our press announcement, a formal request from the summit organizers for Arielle Vance, founder and CEO of Naira Core, to participate in a panel discussion on sovereign data architecture and its implications for international business partnerships. The timing was perfect, the location even better. Munich sat at the intersection of European, American, and Asian business interests, exactly the kind of neutral ground where complex international negotiations could unfold without the political pressures of any single national context. Darren Roque would be there, of course. Hyperion was a platinum sponsor, and he was scheduled to deliver a keynote address on the future of global data integration, probably recycling the slides I'd created 18 months ago with updated corporate messaging about innovation and leadership. But this time I wouldn't be watching from the audience. I arrived at the conference center on Tuesday morning wearing a navy blue suit that projected confidence without ostentation. My name badge identified me simply as Vance Naira Core, no corporate titles or institutional affiliations needed. The main auditorium was packed as Darren took the stage for his keynote. His presentation was polished, professional, and completely predictable. 40 minutes of corporate speak about vision and innovation peppered with technical terminology that sounded impressive until you realized it described capabilities Hyperion no longer possessed. The future of global data integration, he concluded, requires not just technical expertise but institutional stability, corporate partnerships that can deliver consistent results across multiple regulatory frameworks and cultural contexts. This is why Hyperion remains committed to building long-term relationships based on proven methodologies and established best practices. The applause was polite but lukewarm, the kind of response that suggested the audience was being courteous rather than convinced. During the Q&A session, a voice from the back of the auditorium asked, "Mr. Roque, can you comment on recent reports that several major clients have migrated away from Hyperion's platform? What does this suggest about the stability of your technical partnerships?" Darren's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I think that question reflects some misunderstanding about normal business evolution. In our industry, client relationships are always dynamic and we're constantly working with partners to optimize their technical solutions. Sometimes that means structural adjustments that benefit everyone involved, but specifically regarding project ArcBridge, the questioner persisted, how do you explain the departure of the project's chief architect and the subsequent migration of all three major client relationships to her independent firm? I don't think it's appropriate to discuss personnel decisions in this forum, Darren replied, but I will say that Hyperion's commitment to technical excellence remains unchanged regardless of individual employee transitions. The questioner didn't give up, so you're suggesting that losing the architect of your most valuable project has had no impact on your technical capabilities. Before Darren could respond, a new voice cut through the auditorium, clear and calm and immediately recognizable to anyone who'd been following the industry coverage. Perhaps I could offer some perspective on that question. Every head in the room turned toward the back where I stood with my hand raised. The conference moderator looked confused but nodded for me to continue. Arielle Vance, Naira Core, I said, walking slowly down the aisle toward the stage. I think there may be some confusion about the relationship between individual expertise and institutional capability. The auditorium fell completely silent as I reached the front row. Mr. Roque is absolutely correct that client relationships are dynamic, but I think it's worth clarifying that in the case of Project ArcBridge, the clients didn't migrate away from a platform, they migrated toward the technical expertise that made the platform possible in the first place. Darren was staring at me with an expression that mixed shock, anger, and something that looked like fear. Ms. Vance, I don't think this is the appropriate forum for what? I interrupted gently, for discussing the technical realities of sovereign data architecture, for examining the difference between managing relationships and building them, for acknowledging that expertise belongs to individuals rather than institutions. The moderator stepped forward. Ms. Vance, while we appreciate your perspective, perhaps we could continue this discussion in a more structured format. We actually have you scheduled for the afternoon panel on actually, came a voice from the middle of the auditorium. I think this discussion is exactly what we need to hear. Ray Sato stood up in his seat, his expression serious but supportive. The questions being raised here go to the heart of how our industry thinks about technical partnerships. Do we prioritize corporate branding or individual competence? Do we value institutional stability or adaptive expertise? Before the moderator could respond, Linda Clark from Eurosyn stood as well. I agree, this conversation addresses fundamental questions about how we evaluate technical partnerships. Our experience over the past month has demonstrated the importance of working directly with the architects of the systems we're implementing. And then Elias Nwosu's voice carried from the back of the auditorium where he'd been quietly observing. From Nextshore's perspective, the most important factor in any technical partnership is the alignment between promises and capabilities. We've found that working with individual experts often provides greater reliability than working through corporate intermediaries. The moderator looked completely overwhelmed. Well, perhaps we could structure this as an impromptu panel discussion, Mr. Roque, if you're willing to participate in a more collaborative format. Darren's expression suggested he was anything but willing, but with three major industry leaders publicly supporting the discussion and 2,000 pairs of eyes watching his response, he had little choice. Of course, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, I'm always happy to engage in productive dialogue about industry best practices. For the next 40 minutes, the auditorium became the stage for a real-time case study in corporate accountability. I didn't attack Darren personally or criticize Hyperion's business practices. Instead, I simply answered questions about technical architecture, regulatory compliance, and client relationship management with the kind of specific, detailed knowledge that could only come from actually building the systems being discussed. When asked about data sovereignty protocols, I walked through the technical specifications that enabled true regulatory compliance. When questioned about cultural sensitivity in international partnerships, I described the 18 months of relationship building that had made Project ArcBridge possible. When challenged about the scalability of independent technical firms, I outlined Naira Core's expansion plans and the growing demand for specialized expertise. Darren, meanwhile, found himself in the increasingly uncomfortable position of trying to discuss technical capabilities he didn't understand, client relationships he hadn't built, and systems he couldn't maintain. His responses became progressively more generic, more corporate, and more obviously inadequate. The fundamental question, I said as the discussion neared its end, is whether we believe that technical expertise can be institutionalized or whether it remains inherently personal. I would argue that while systems can be documented and processes can be standardized, the judgment required to navigate complex international partnerships, the cultural sensitivity needed to build trust across different regulatory frameworks, and the technical creativity necessary to solve unprecedented problems, these capabilities belong to individuals, not institutions. And when individuals leave institutions, Ray added, those capabilities leave with them unless the institution has invested In genuine knowledge transfer rather than superficial management, the applause that followed was sustained and clearly supportive not just of the technical arguments but of the broader principle being articulated that expertise earned through experience could not be replaced by expertise claimed through authority. As the session ended and the crowd began to disperse, I found myself surrounded by business cards and conversation requests, conference attendees who wanted to discuss potential partnerships, technology journalists seeking follow-up interviews, industry analysts curious about the implications of the conversation they just witnessed. But the most satisfying moment came as I was gathering my materials to leave. Darren approached the stage area, his expression carefully neutral, his manner suggesting someone trying to salvage dignity from an impossible situation. Arielle, he said quietly, I think there may have been some misunderstandings about the circumstances of your departure from Hyperion. Perhaps we could discuss potential collaboration moving forward. I looked at him for a long moment. This interim CEO who had fired me without warning, used my work without attribution, and then tried to claim my expertise as institutional capability. Darren, I said finally, I think the circumstances were perfectly clear and I think today's discussion demonstrated the natural consequences of those circumstances, but thank you for the conversation. I think it was very illuminating for everyone involved. As I walked away from the conference center, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that termination email arrived: complete vindication, not through revenge or retaliation but through simple demonstration of competence. They had tried to erase the architect from the building. Instead, they had proven that the building had always belonged to the architect. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of Naira Corps' new headquarters in Lower Manhattan, watching morning light stream through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered unobstructed views of the Hudson River. The space was everything I'd envisioned when I first imagined building something that respected expertise rather than extracted it. Clean lines, sustainable materials, and the kind of thoughtful design that suggested permanence without ostentation. The etched glass doors bore a simple inscription, Naira Core Global Data Architecture, with my name below it, Arielle Vance, founder and CEO. No corporate flourishes or marketing superlatives, just clear acknowledgement of ownership and responsibility. The Lagos office is officially operational, Zane reported during our morning leadership call. His image appeared on the large monitor in our main conference room alongside Vera from our Amsterdam office and Mina from our temporary Tokyo workspace. Elias cut the ribbon yesterday and their initial processing benchmarks are exceeding all projections. European compliance certifications came through this morning, Vera added. Linda's team has confirmed that our regulatory framework meets every requirement for expanded operations across the EU. We're cleared for implementation in 12 additional countries. And Tokyo? I asked, turning to Mina, who was calling in from what looked like a modern office space with Mount Fuji visible in the distance. Ray's been telling everyone who'll listen that Naira Core's sovereignty protocols represent the future of international data architecture, she said. We've had 6 major Japanese firms request consultations this week alone, including 2 that specifically mentioned wanting to work with the team that built the ArcBridge framework. I felt the familiar satisfaction of watching careful planning yield sustainable results, but more than that, I felt something I'd never experienced during my years at Hyperion: complete alignment between personal values and professional practice. Speaking of sustainable results, Vera said, the quarterly financial review is remarkable. We're operating at 40% above projected revenue with client satisfaction scores that are literally off the charts, and more importantly, our profit margins allow us to invest in long-term research and development rather than just quarterly performance metrics. What about competitive response? Hyperion filed for Chapter 11 restructuring last month, Mina said matter-of-factly. Darren was removed as interim CEO in February after the board finally acknowledged that you can't run a technical services company without technical expertise. The official press release blamed market conditions and industry volatility. Unofficially, everyone in the industry understands that they lost their competitive advantage when they fired the person who'd built it. Vera said, it's become a case study in business schools about the difference between managing talent and owning talent. I walked to the window overlooking the river, thinking about the journey from that termination email to this moment of institutional stability, from watching my name erased from corporate presentations to seeing it etched in glass above my own front door. There's something else, Zane said. Marcus Chen from Deutsche Bank called yesterday. They're launching a major expansion into African markets and want to discuss partnership opportunities. Specifically, they want to work with firms that understand sovereign data architecture and have proven track records in cross-cultural business development. And Elena Rodriguez from Singapore Financial has been asking about our capacity for Southeast Asian implementations. Mina added, the demand for truly sovereign data solutions is exploding across Asia-Pacific. As if summoned by our conversation, my assistant knocked on the conference room door. Ms. Vance, I have Tomoko Ishikawa from Nikkei Online too. She says it's regarding the feature article about independent technical Firms disrupting traditional corporate models. I smiled thinking about how different this interview would be from that first cautious conversation 6 months ago. Tell her I'll take the call in 5 minutes. Also, my assistant continued, you have 3 requests for speaking engagements this afternoon. The Global Technology Leadership Summit in Singapore wants you to keynote their session on innovation and institutional knowledge. The Harvard Business School is requesting a guest lecture on entrepreneurship and corporate transition, and the World Economic Forum would like you to participate in a panel on the future of international business partnerships. I felt a moment of quiet amazement. 6 months ago I'd been erased from industry conversations. Today I was being asked to lead them. One more update, Vera said. I received a very interesting call from a law firm representing several former Hyperion employees who are claiming systematic discrimination and retaliation. They're building a class action lawsuit and want to know if you'd be willing to provide testimony about corporate culture and management practices. I considered this carefully. The opportunity for legal vindication was tempting, but I'd already achieved something more valuable than court-ordered compensation. I'd proven that competence could triumph over politics, that expertise could outlast extraction, that quiet confidence could defeat loud mediocrity. Tell them I appreciate the invitation, but I'm focused on building rather than litigating, I said, though I'd be happy to provide character references for any former colleagues who want to pursue their own paths. After the call ended, I found myself alone in the conference room looking out at Manhattan's morning bustle, each person on the street below pursuing their own version of professional fulfillment, their own balance between institutional loyalty and individual integrity. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Ms. Vance, this is James Morrison, former account manager at Hyperion. I wanted to thank you for the recommendation letter you provided for my application to Columbia Business School. Your note about the difference between managing relationships and building them really resonated with the admissions committee. I smiled, remembering the young account manager who'd been caught between corporate politics and client reality. He'd reached out 3 months ago asking for career advice, and I'd been happy to help him understand that being trapped in someone else's dysfunction didn't define your own potential. Another message arrived, this one from Linda Clark. Arielle, congratulations on the NIRA Core expansion announcement. The European business community is buzzing about your approach to international partnerships. You've created exactly the kind of model we've been hoping to see, more technically sophisticated, culturally respectful, and genuinely collaborative. But the message that meant the most came from Elias Nwosu. My friend, I wanted you to know that the partnership with NIRA Core has exceeded every expectation we had when we first discussed sovereign data architecture, but more than that, working with your team has restored our faith that American technology companies can be genuine partners rather than just sophisticated extractors. Thank you for showing us what ethical business relationships look like. As afternoon light began to slant through the conference room windows, I walked through our expanding office space, past developers working on next-generation sovereignty protocols, past analysts reviewing compliance frameworks for emerging markets, past account managers building relationships based on technical competence rather than corporate hierarchy. In the lobby, I paused again at the etched glass doors, reading my name in clean professional letters. That simple inscription represented something more valuable than any corporate title I'd ever pursued. It represented ownership, not just of a company but of a vision, the vision that expertise belonged to the people who developed it, that loyalty should flow both directions in professional relationships, that building something meaningful required respecting the people who did the building. Outside on the Manhattan street, I looked up at the glass tower that had once housed my Hyperion office, 53 floors of corporate hierarchy and institutional politics where my expertise had been used but never acknowledged, where my contributions had been erased as soon as they became inconvenient. But that building no longer defined my professional identity. This one did. 6 months ago they'd fired the architect of their most valuable project, believing they could separate the building from the builder. Today, I stood in the lobby of my own firm, surrounded by clients who valued competence over corporate branding, colleagues who understood that expertise was personal rather than institutional, partners who knew the difference between using someone and respecting them. They thought firing me would solve their problem. Instead, it had revealed exactly what their problem was and what the solution looked like. The solution looked like NIRA Core. The solution looked like my name on the door. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, it would mean a lot.